Okay, well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, From Fatigue to Vitality, Fueling Your Energetic Potential. I'm Rebecca Armstrong, Director of Patient Education and Engagement with the Canadian Breast Cancer Network. This session is being recorded and will be available on our website for anyone who may have missed it, and I'll send out a link once the recording is available. You'll also be able to find previously recorded webinars that address a variety of different breast cancer related topics on our website as well. I'd like to extend our sincere appreciation to our sponsors for today's session who have provided support through unrestricted educational grants. Pfizer, our gold level sponsor, Bayer, Tercera, and AstraZeneca, our bronze level sponsors. The format for today's session will be a presentation by our speaker, followed by a question and answer period. Please feel free to submit your questions throughout the session using the Q&A function that you should be able to find at the bottom of your screen. I'd now like to welcome the host for our session, Kathy Amendolia, Chair of the Board for the Canadian Breast Cancer Network.
Thank you, Rebecca. Welcome again, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm very pleased to welcome and introduce our expert speaker, Tanya Brasseur, who is a certified health and wellness coach and yoga teacher with a Bachelor of Science and over 30, including a decade in oncology. As a volunteer at the West Island Cancer Center in Quebec, she supports individuals navigating cancer with compassion, knowledge, and holistic.
Oh, Kathy seems to be cutting out a bit. I can take over just to finish up the introductions before Kathy gets back online there. So her work is grounded in science, guided by the Wellness 360 methodology, an integrative root cause approach to well-being. Tanya helps clients make sustainable lifestyle changes using evidence-based strategies tailored to their daily lives. She specializes in supporting individuals to improve sleep, combat fatigue, reduce stress and anxiety, and embrace healthy eating and movement practices. Her mission is to empower people to feel energized, strong, grounded, and aligned. Okay, great to see you today, Tanya. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen.
Go ahead.
And I just also want to make sure that if you can just get Rebecca before you log off, does everything look good? The slides are there?
Yes, the slides are there.
Perfect. Great. So thank you so much for that beautiful and warm introduction. The Canadian Breast Cancer Network, I guess, organization and team is someone who I've known and collaborated with professionally for over the last 10 years. I've just always been amazed at the great work that you guys do. And so I actually wish, and I actually recently saw on your website, you were celebrating 30 years. That is fantastic. I actually just wish I knew about you guys when my mom was going through cancer like 30 some years ago. But anyway, so I am truly honored to be here today and sharing this great webinar, an educational event with your community. And so today we're here to talk about dealing with fatigue and how we can fuel our energetic potential. Because fatigue is very real, yes? And so I want everybody who's on with me here, I invite you to pop a yes in the chat if sometimes you find yourself wanting to do things, perhaps you're maybe even planning to do things, and then your body just won't let you. Pop a yes in the chat if fatigue sometimes gets in the way of your everyday living. Pop a yes in the chat if you are tired of feeling and being tired. So I remember, I want to just take you back maybe to just a moment in my life. This was probably about 20 years ago. At the time, I was a mom, a new mom of my second child, my daughter, and I just started a new job. And I was like working crazy hours, and I was sitting there And then all of a sudden I was seeing these mounds of laundry. Okay, I had the mound of clean laundry one side, the mound of dirty laundry in the other. And I was realizing that I did not have clean underwear for my son. And so I don't know, in that moment, it was like those mounds of laundry, they felt like Mount Everest to me. I was exhausted, and it was kind of a breaking point for me. And I just knew this wasn't sustainable, and I had to find a new way. This had to change. And so it sparked a desire in me to research and find ways and cultivate ways to optimize my health span, my well-being, to really live a life and cultivate practices from a place of groundedness, energy, and vibrancy. And so that's what I've done for the last 20 years, for myself, but also for clients I work with now. And it is a practice. I mentioned practices because there's ebbs and flows in our lives, and things change, and you'll meet different things along the way. And so ultimately, it's about finding our rhythm. And I know it's possible to reclaim our energy, to live with vitality, so that we can enjoy those little things without exhaustion, right? Without things feeling like Mount Everest, if you will. And so fatigue, I know, is real. It isn't laziness, and it's not weakness. It's a signal. And I like to call it my body wisdom. And so you have this too within you. It's your body's way of asking for repair, for regulation, and restoration. And what's interesting about energy, I was thinking about it in the context of, our health and everything else. It's not something that we can measure like a scan or a blood test. It's living, it's dynamic, it's qualitative, right? We feel it, we live it. But when we nurture it, it can expand. And so the good news is that there are evidence-based strategies that can help improve fatigue and can rebuild energy. And with the right tools and a compassionate stepwise approach, that is very possible. And that's what I want to focus on today, is sharing that research and practices and things that I know that I've experienced myself and with clients that are effective and that work, one small step at a time. My objective today with all of you is to perhaps share some information, and hopefully you leave inspired by maybe a few learnings that you'll get along the way. I also want to create space for self-reflection. So I'm going to get you and maybe ask you a few questions along the way for you to really reflect on what this means and what this information means for you in your daily lives. And ultimately, my last objective is that I really believe in order to integrate this into our day-to-day, we need to keep things very practical, very tangible. And so I want you to feel empowered and leave with at least one tangible action that you can use in your day-to-day. So as you're listening and coming along this journey with me today, if there's anything that you feel really resonates with you, then please capture it, think about it, and commit to yourself and to me here today that you will go and perhaps try it in your day-to-day. So to start, let's look within and look at the processes involved within our bodies around the energetic processes. So our body makes energy as part of our metabolism, essentially, through the metabolic processes. So I'm going to just very top line, just give you a sense of what those step-by-step processes entail. So the first thing is our fuel, our food. It is our primary fuel. It's what really gives us energy. So when we eat carbs, carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, which are essentially macronutrients, our body then breaks those down into molecules like glucose, fatty acids, and amino acids. These molecules are carried into our cells, where then they meet oxygen. And the oxygen we get from our respiration. And then in this cell, in our cells, we find our mitochondria, which are often referred to as our powerhouses of the cell, because what they do is they convert this fuel and the oxygen and these molecules, and they convert that into ATP, which is essentially currency, our energy currency. And ATP is then used to power what our body needs. So various like cellular and bodily functions, like for example, it'll power everything from like muscle contraction to thinking, to our immune system and responses to digestion. So all of these things are at play. And finally, another component are hormones, which are very prevalent in our bodies. They also play a role, certain ones, in energy balance and fuel our metabolism as well. So in essence, that's the gist of the process. But know that, when it comes to impacting energy, fatigue isn't all in our heads. Sometimes it's hard to like fatigue. It's very much like qualitative. But in fact, fatigue, when you kind of think about it, it's like it's in our gut, it's in our cells, it's in our hormones, and in our immune system, it's even in our nervous system. So there are multiple systems, in fact, within our bodies that influence and impact energy production. And cancer treatments can further impact our body's system's ability to deal with this. And then sometimes that can lead to cancer-related fatigue, which can cause extreme tiredness, weakness, and exhaustion. So I just want to take a moment and just speak to a few of these levers to understand the mechanisms behind, because when we talk about, some strategies and what we can do about it, understanding a little bit where it comes from and how they support it can be can help us understand the why behind things. So the first four here on this slide, we mentioned in the previous slide, yes? So just to recap a little bit, like that food we eat, but I will mention also the hydration. So hydration is really important for cellular respiration, but also how well we absorb our food and hydration, which speaks to our gut health. That is foundational to our energy. And nutrients, right? Sometimes if we're depleted in nutrients and things like iron, B12, magnesium, or vitamin D, that can have an effect on the energy levels that we feel. We saw oxygen and that role it played in the process. So having the right saturation of oxygen in our bloodstream is important. The mitochondria, yes, those are our body's energy factories. Sometimes if there's things at play, whether it can be chronic inflammation in our bodies, or perhaps like chemotherapy or radiation, those can damage mitochondria and make them less efficient at producing ATP. So basic tasks, and that's why they can feel harder, because our cells aren't producing the energy like they used to. Hormones. We saw some hormones influence ATP production and the production of energy, but we have other hormones in our body as well, right? They're messengers. They help regulate sleep, temperature, brain clarity, mood. And so when hormones get out of balance, sometimes our energy can suffer. Chronic inflammation. When our body has chronic inflammation, that just basically like uses up a lot of energy, because ultimately like there's a signal to our brain. It'll tell your body, because it wants to protect you from that chronic inflammation, the brain will send signals to slow down. Sometimes it triggers, I guess, like kind of akin to like a power saving mode, where you're going to experience fatigue, brain fog, low motivation. So ultimately it almost feels like your body is shutting down. And so that can be at play as well. So of course, one of the things we want to do is optimize that, right? We want to think of can we control inflammation in our bodies, have an anti-inflammatory approach. The nervous system. So we're in this, go, go, go. We were just talking a little earlier, but like that, when you're in a go, 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 always doing, we're in a busyness type of culture. We're stimulated by all kinds of things, phones, screens, to-dos. We're running from one thing to the other. So it should be no surprise that they estimate that around 70% of people are actually living in a chronic state of stress, chronic stress. And when we're in this chronic stress, we're like in a nervous system overdrive. So I'll just remind people, which you may already know, right? So in our nervous system, we have the sympathetic and the parasympathetic parts to it. And the sympathetic is that fight or flight. And it's important for us. We need it. We need it when we need to get that adrenaline going, if we're, if there's an emergency or you really have to react. The parasympathetic, that's like a nice brake system to our body. It's the rest and digest. And the problem with being in overdrive is it's like having your foot on the gas with like no brakes. And so when you're in this chronic stress state and overdrive, you're burning through so much energy, you're interrupting your healing process, you're making it harder for your body to shift into a rest and restore mode your body needs to heal, to recharge, and to optimally also function and have other processes work more optimally. And finally, sleep. Sleep is when our bodies repair cells. And so if we have, pain or anxiety, hot flashes, or maybe sometimes medications can interfere with our deep sleep, making the energy recovery that much more difficult. So our goal really, when it comes to our overall health and well-being, is we want to optimize all of these like different levers in our system. But if I want you to retain, one of the things to retain today is that our body is a beautiful ecosystem. And in fact, all of these different levers, they work together. They're not really working in silos. And so by leveraging these synergies between these things and making small targeted changes and shifts, so one small shift can impact many of these levers. And you're going to see later on in our strategies just what that entails. And it can be truly transformative. And so the importance of an integrated approach to manage fatigue is really important in creating this total healing ecosystem, if you will. There could be many factors that lead to fatigue. And so working with your healthcare team in order to investigate and rule out potential underlying conditions is really important. So as you can see here on the slide, there could be a number of different underlying conditions that could cause fatigue as a symptom. And perhaps I'll just share my story. So this was about, I guess, a year ago. And it was actually during my yearly exam with my physician. We noticed in my blood tests, right, that there was like an aspect that was a little off. And upon further probing, realizing that I actually was anemic. So I had anemia. And in hindsight, like it was interesting because it was through the screening that I kind of realized and brought to surface that I was anemic. But when I gave it more thought, I was realizing too that I was just feeling really tired and exhausted as of late. It dawned on me that, driving at night, I wasn't comfortable driving at night anymore. And in my case, I'm perimenopausal, so my periods were really heavy. And so that was causing the anemia. So I was able, but knowing this, I was able to take action, address the anemia as a root cause, and it really did help my situation. But I will say that even working with your healthcare team, like while that's extremely important, I truly believe in the power of an integrated approach. because what you can do in combination with everything with modern medicine has to offer, and what you can do from a health and wellness and lifestyle approach, and when you use both in combination, it can be truly transformative, powerful, and make a big difference. And so this is the exciting part. So now we're going to move on to the 3 key ingredients to unlock our energetic potential so that we can feel energetic and vibrant. So the 3 key ingredients essentially are around these following 3 things. So the first is around rebuilding the foundation. Sleep is such a key pillar to our health. It is really our base layer. It's where the body regenerates and repairs. And without quality sleep, energy can't sustainably be restored. It really is a key lever, I think, a foundational one to really ensure that we're optimizing. And I'm going to get into each of these in more detail in a moment. The second is around regulating our system, because through our breath, we can regulate many systems in our body actually, but our nervous system is a key one. And when we calm the system, we conserve energy. The regulation of our nervous system through the breath, and in so doing, many other systems, by the way, it really helps our body to stop leaking energy. The third key ingredient is replenishing our body through nutrition and movement. It's giving what our body needs to replenish our energy by feeding it and activating vitality. And so I want you to just take a moment, right? We're looking at these things: sleeping, breathing, eating. These are all things you're likely doing already. So what you're going to see, I think what's interesting about this is it doesn't necessarily mean this is not a completely we're not reinventing your whole life or putting way more on your plate. When you think about it, it's not about doing more, but just perhaps shifting what you're already doing and perhaps approaching it just in a different way. And in so doing, we can reignite and find ways that are effective in reigniting our energy production. So let's move into that first key ingredient being sleep. So I mentioned that sleep is a fundamental pillar of our health. What's interesting about sleep, and today, what I hope maybe might be interesting for you to look at, is I'm going to go beyond just providing you with maybe the traditional or typical sleep hygiene list that you have come across. We're going to understand what's behind sleep, because when we work with our natural body processes of sleep, once you learn to work with it and not fight it, we can optimize deep sleep even further. I had one client mention, once I got serious about a sleep routine, everything else started to shift. I had less brain fog, more patience, and more energy. So sleep, in fact, is really interesting because there's probably no disease or organ system that you can't find that has some kind of relationship or connection to sleep. Poor sleep is definitely linked to fatigue, and the research shows that cancer-related fatigue is tightly linked to disrupted circadian rhythms and sleep quality. So essentially what we're trying to cultivate here is to optimize our deep sleep, because deep sleep is when our body restores the immune system, energy system. It's the time when the body regenerates mitochondria, balances hormones, heals, it resets our inflammation, our immune function, and also mental clarity. So it does a lot. So I mentioned that we all sleep, right? It's a natural process. If you think of it, all mammals, the longer you stay awake, the more sleepy, I guess, and eventually you will fall asleep. So we do all sleep, but the question is, how well are you sleeping? And so I invite you to put in the chat right now, reflect perhaps on, the recent weeks. And I want you by the word, red, yellow, or green, indicate how well you're sleeping recently. So red, meaning your sleep isn't great. Yellow, it's not awful, but it's not optimal. And green means you have sleep completely under control and it's doing fantastic. So I'm looking at the chat here. We definitely have a mix, but there's quite a bit of like red and yellow I can see. A few people with green, so that's fantastic. Keep doing what you're doing. But it's always nice to understand where our sleep patterns and how that all works. All right, so the answer to the question, how well are you sleeping, starts by looking at two key metrics, which is sleep quantity and sleep quantity. So let's look at those a little further. In terms of sleep quantity, the exact amount of hours that people really truly need actually varies from person to person. And what we actually, the other thing we see is that it declines as we age. So I know people have typically heard probably that 7 to 9 range of hours of sleep, right? Which is probably a good range. But some people might only need 6 and other people might, can go up to 10. But at the end of the day, to assess your adequate quantity of sleep, it's to ask yourself, do I have symptoms of sleepiness or tiredness the next day? In which case, then I'm getting the right quantity of sleep. And so, so I mentioned, as we age, our needs tend to decline over time. So as probably no surprise, but when, teenagers, they will tip to the higher end, right? So teenagers will typically need a little bit higher, like 8 to 10. The adult population, 7 to 9 is a typical range. And as we age, it might go down 6 to 8, when we hit the 60s and 70s. The other thing we've learned, though, is the research consistently shows that there are some health consequences that can arise if you consistently get less than 6 hours of sleep. So if you're in the red, because a lot of people sometimes, if they're busy or they feel like sleep is something that they can compromise or cut back in order to do more. So that's okay, when it's a couple of times, but if you're consistently getting less than 6 hours of sleep, while you might be able to function and push through, just know that this could affect like your metabolic health, cardiovascular, hormone balance, mental cognition, and even being at risk for chronic diseases. Because sleep is such an important pillar, as we saw earlier, and the impacts on all those different systems it has, right, in terms of benefits of sleep. So that's quantity of sleep. So now let's look at quality of sleep. And the measure, really the best measure to look at that, is called sleep efficiency. The way to calculate sleep efficiency is essentially looking at the number of hours you are truly sleeping over the number of hours in bed trying to sleep. So that's not like sitting in bed reading a book, but the hours that you're truly trying to sleep. And so you turn that into a percentage, and that becomes your sleep efficiency. The one thing I want you to just keep in mind here is our target, what we're aiming for as a good metric, is an 85 to 90% sleep efficiency. So those are sort of two good metrics to kind of gauge how you're sleeping, if it's good sleep or poor sleep. Now we're going to go towards, remember I mentioned those natural processes and what's behind sleep. So interestingly, you were only in ever two states you're either asleep or awake. There's kind of no in between in terms of us being in a state, right, of being either asleep or awake. And years ago, scientists thought that being asleep or awake were part of the same process, kind of like, flipping a coin, and that it was either on or off. So you were either asleep or awake, but they used to think it was part of the same process. What research and science then showed was that, in fact, being asleep and being awake are two distinct processes. And so they each have their own process and they're opposing forces. So they're both happening at the same time in parallel. And ultimately, what determines whether you're asleep or awake is whichever force, whichever stronger is going to prevail. I'm going to walk you through a little bit of these in more detail because it's super interesting to understand the mechanics behind this so that when we're talking about sleep hygiene and practices, we understand how we can help facilitate these processes. So let's look at sleepiness first of all. So there's a few molecules that and mechanisms that help us feeling sleepy and eventually fall asleep and go to sleep. The first being adenosine. So adenosine, also known as the sleep pressure builder. So what happens with adenosine is that this builds up over the day. So it accumulates the longer you're awake. So you're kind of like building an adenosine bank throughout the day. Think of it like that. And then at one point, your body has so much adenosine and it creates this sleep pressure. It makes you sleepy. Okay. And so it'll help you sleep and also stay asleep throughout the night. So its role is to promote sleep onset and maintain deep sleep. So you want to create some healthy adenosine banks, okay, throughout your day, ultimately. Exercise is one way, or movement is one way to do that. So when you exercise, it actually stimulates adenosine and puts some adenosine into the adenosine bank. Another chemical is called melatonin. It's actually a hormone. Now, melatonin is known as the timekeeper, right? So it's secreted by our pineal gland when it gets dark. Its role is to signal that it's time to sleep. So it doesn't directly call sleepiness. It's almost like the start of a race. If you have, the person who draws the pistol for a sprint, that's what like melatonin is. It's basically the starter pistol to say it's time to sleep. And that's sort of what its role is. GABA, a neurotransmitter, it's also known as your brain's natural brake pedal. So it has this beautiful way of helping you feel calm, staying asleep, reducing anxiety. So that's what that does. So that's sleepiness. On the wakefulness part, we have histamine, dopamine, and cortisol. So histamine and dopamine, those are neurotransmitters that basically, if there's a stimulation, like light, sound, or stress, that's going to transmit a brain signal to increase arousal, alertness, and regulate your wakefulness. It'll make you awake. Cortisol, which you've probably heard of, right, as the stress hormone. So it's also known as the morning signal when it comes to sleep, because 30 minutes after we wake up, we actually get a surge of cortisol, and its role is to kind of prepare our body for the day of activity. But it's also a double-edged sword, right? Because if you have a stressor and you're stimulating something and you're stressed, that increased cortisol can promote wakefulness when you're trying to sleep. So imagine a scenario. So you're understanding that these are two processes at play at once, right? So it's nighttime. You're sitting, in front of the couch. You are feeling sleepy, but then something happens. There's a stimulus that happens, and it's like a fire alarm, right? And then it causes your wakefulness to take over, and maybe it could become like even anxiety. Sometimes you start worrying about sleeping, and so then the wakefulness will sort of kick in, and it makes the sleepiness, it just takes over, right? So that's what I just want you to understand. Those are the two kind of forces at play. And so knowing this, you know, ask yourself, to promote good sleep, am I facilitating my sleepiness, throughout the day? Or even at night, am I making it harder to go to sleep by stimulating some wakeful processes that might override? So just understanding that, I find, can sometimes really help people, make better informed decisions and just understand the impact of what they're doing. All right, so moving on. So there are two systems that regulate sleep and wakefulness. So there's homeostasis and the circadian rhythm. Homeostasis, also known as sleep pressure. I won't go too much into that one because we covered it a lot with the adenosine, but that is the main chemical that regulates that sleep pressure. So just to recap, right? So the longer you're awake during the day, the more you're creating that adenosine bank, which is creating this sleep pressure. And then you go to bed, you sleep, and by the morning, after a good night's sleep, the sleep pressure is at its lowest in the morning. Okay, so that's the homeostasis system. The circadian rhythm, also known as our body's natural clock. This stems from our brain, and because it's our body's natural clock, our brain loves routine, right? So anytime you can establish a routine, a rhythm, right? And whether it comes to wake up time, meal time, when you move, exposure to light, you're training your brain. And so I'm not saying like that we have to live, because that would be boring. Like it's not about, living your days necessarily in a routine that's always the same. But it's just to understand that that's what our body and our circadian rhythm likes, and to function like if you're having issues with sleep, sometimes creating a bit more of routines can just help your brain to train it and help improve your sleep. So it's just understanding that there is a correlation there. So I mentioned the light exposure, but also our body temperatures are part of the circadian rhythm. So when we sleep, the circadian rhythm causes our changes in our body temperature. So naturally, our body temperature lowers at night when we sleep. And by like 4 a.m., 5 a.m., our body temperature rises, which helps promote wakefulness and helps us sort of wake up. And so even like things like, so our body temperature, the temperature in our room, if we're too hot, menopausal hot flashes, all kinds of things. Obviously now you can see that those types of things will impact the circadian rhythm and hence our sleep. So I just did want to kind of set all those natural processes up and now come back to these sleep hygiene tips that we sometimes, probably these you may have come across before, but I'm mapping them to the natural processes that we've just reviewed together, because hopefully now you can see sort of why these are practices that are being recommended. So things that help the circadian rhythm, right? So establishing routines, a consistent wake up time. By the way, all the leading experts, if you just do one thing for sleep, a consistent wake up time is probably the most effective thing you can do to really help with your sleep. The impact of light, yes, so for our circadian rhythm. So keeping your room dark in the morning, telling your brain that you want to go outside first thing in the morning, being mindful of screens and so forth before bed. The temperature control, so having a cool room, but also a hot bath before bed can help. And it's not just a relaxation thing. In fact, it's because you take a hot bath, when you go into your bed, your core body temperature is having to cool down in order to compensate for the hot bath. And that cooling mechanism is what helps you fall asleep. Then that next bucket around the sleep pressure, right? So I was talking about our adenosine bank. So that's where we just want to try to avoid stimulants at certain times of days, which can impact that adenosine bank that we're trying to develop. And even exercise, right? That's great. Moving, being active, that can be great for our adenosine. But if you do it too close to bedtime, the exercise actually increases your body temperature. So that can, again, it's like knowing the different levers, right? So you're like, okay, well, that can actually, I'm working against myself if I'm doing it too close to bed. Napping. Napping can be a very good tool if used strategically and wisely. So if we nap too long or too late in the day, again, we're going to deplete those adenosines, right? Which will make it harder for us to fall asleep and stay asleep throughout the night. And then finally, that wakefulness, right? So if we have a nice, calm, inviting environment, um, if it's a question of anxiety, perhaps trying to look at our acceptance and letting go of expectations. I know sometimes when people understand that sleep is a natural process, they can sort of like let go expectations and pressures that they put on themselves. But ultimately, we're trying to not create that overstimulus of wakefulness, to let the natural processes of our sleepiness take hold. So that is the sleep part. So now moving on to our second key ingredient, which is around our breath and how it can regulate our systems, especially the nervous system. We breathe approximately 22,000 times per day, and probably most of the time without thinking about it. What I'd like to propose for you today is I want you to increase your awareness around your breath so that we can start to breathe more consciously. And how we breathe actually matters. And the reason I say that is because our breathing technique, how we breathe, can act either as a gas pedal or as a brake. So breathing has been shown through research, right, to be just like sleep. It affects many systems in our bodies. It affects the immune, cardiovascular, respiratory, even our dental health. And when it comes to our sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic, we can use our breath consciously to hit that brake, right? To activate the parasympathetic system and regulate our bodies. When we activate the parasympathetic system, we lower our heart rate, we lower blood pressure, we have an anti-inflammatory effect, we boost our immune system. So to fuel the health of our cells and to boost energy, we actually need to breathe less. So I talked about 22,000 times a day. You will see, and I am going to teach you now, and we're going to work on this together. We're going to take a moment and experience some effective breathing techniques. So there's two things I want you to practice today with me. And the first is breathing through the nose. The second is slow and diaphragmic breathing. These two elements are essential, are really the key ingredients as well to effective breathing. And I just want to give you a little bit of just understanding why it would be important to do this. So when we breathe through the nose, 18% more oxygen is actually fueled in our bloodstream and in our cells. And remember that how the important role of oxygen in the energy ATP process. And so this is due to several factors, in fact. The other benefits of nose breathing is it filters the air, it warms it, it humidifies the inhaled air. It produces nitric oxide, which causes blood vessels to dilate and improve oxygen transport. It reaches the lower lobes of your lungs for greater lung capacity. And when coupled with like nose and slow and diaphragmatic breathing, this triggers our parasympathetic system, which is that relaxation state. It's decreased stress. And so these are all like benefits, right? So, okay, so now we're going to, we're actually going to put this into practice together. So I want you to find a comfortable seat. And the important thing is to have a tall spine, okay? So I don't want to be slouching in a chair. So sit up, hold yourself in your center, sit comfortably, relax your shoulders though, relax the shoulders. And we just start with a tall spine because we do want to create space for the diaphragm to have to move and breathe. So we're going to be breathing through the nose. And the quality of our breath, it should be nice, soft, calm, and steady. And we're going to have a different cadence. So for some people, our capacity, it'll be easier to take deeper breaths than others. So at the end of the day, I want you to go at your pace, whatever feels comfortable for you. And so as I'm going to guide you through some nose breathing, I want you to think of a continuous cycle. Okay, so we're going to breathe in, we're going to inhale, and then we're going to exhale. But I don't want you to exhale fully. I want you to, at the end of your exhalation, don't let like the air completely out of your lungs. I want you to kind of start your inhale again and just think of this nice, beautiful, infinite, continuous circle where you keep breathing in and out. Because it shouldn't be, the quality of the breath shouldn't be like intense or forceful. And the other thing too is that we should focus on the inhale and just let kind of the exhale happen. All right. So sit comfortably. You can put your hands on your knees if you need. You can close your eyes or not, whatever you feel is more comfortable. For some people, you might even put a hand on your chest and a hand on your navel if you so choose, or just keep them on your knees. So with a tall spine, we're going to start inhaling through the nose and exhale. Inhale and exhale. So keeping that infinite circle going, inhaling and exhaling. And the nice thing about these types of breath practices, for some people, there's different ways to bring our attention and focus to our breath, to the present moment. So keep breathing as I'm talking, in and out through the nose. So you can listen to the sound of your breath. It might sound like the ocean. For some people, they like to count the breath. 2, 3, 4, 5. And so we've probably just only been doing some nose breathing, diaphragmatic breathing for just a few minutes. But my guess, and I invite you to pop in the chat a yes, if already just by doing these short breathing exercises, You feel calmer than you did just a few minutes ago. You might have a sensation that your body feels and your mind feel unwound. I have one person feeling tired, so that's okay. There's actually, I just want to say, when it comes to the whole breathwork space, I've been practicing breathwork for 25 years. And so at an individual level, we can work with someone and find there's all kinds of different types of breathing drills and everything else that can help sometimes like stimulate energy, have a relaxation effect. But at the end of the day, you saw, right? The breath, it's in our control, it's free. We all breathe. And so, what I invite you is to try this on your own. And it doesn't take much, it could be in your car. Just start by becoming aware. Am I breathing through my nose or am I breathing through my mouth? And I encourage you to just try and start breathing through your nose more often. Sometimes it can feel really difficult at first, but the more you do it, the easier it gets. It's like training a muscle, right? It will get better, it will get easier. And so, whether it's like part of your morning routine or at night or just when you need it most, it could be in that moment of chaos when life just gets a lot. You pause, stop, take 5. Even just 5 deep breaths through the nose is like a reset button throughout the day. And the more you practice this, I just find myself, I breathe through the nose, I would say predominantly now. So it's like I said, the more you practice it, the more it becomes like part of just how you live. So we're going to move on to our third pillar, our third key ingredient, which was to replenish our energies through nutrition and movement. And so when it comes to nutrition, the food we eat and how well we absorb it is foundational to energy. And so I do want to just make clear, right? I am not a nutritionist, but when I do work, so what I'm not going to give any sort of prescribed meal plans or specific approaches to manage a condition. But what I love helping people integrate and what I love sharing information on are easy to follow principles, healthy eating principles, which make healthy eating accessible, actually. It's a great pathway in. It makes it sustainable because it's like diets are restrictive and can be very prescriptive and they're not necessarily sustainable. So I want to share with you today some great principles that hopefully you can start considering to integrate into your day-to-day. So the healthy eating principles. So we're going to review these 4 principles. And to make these realistic, fun, and easy, there's sort of like two filters or things that I apply in my day-to-day. And so the first is about adding in. So, at the end of the day, you want to be realistic. You want to be able to have that ice cream and chocolate cake and enjoy it when you need it. Yes. But the more you add in healthy eating principles, the less room there is for the rest. And so it just makes it easier, honestly, to just embrace ensuring we have lots of great healthy foods most of the time. And that leads me to like my second filter, which is I live by a 80-20 mantra, which really speaks to consistency. Because if you're doing these principles most of the time, then you're doing great. You have a bad day or a cheat day, tomorrow's another day, but you want to have, a glass of wine, enjoy it. Have that chocolate cake that I mentioned earlier and enjoy it. So if you're truly living in general by healthy eating principles, that just makes it sustainable and realistic. So the first thing I think to strive for, especially when it comes to like to help maintain a healthy energy, are nutrient dense whole foods, because these types of foods will support mitochondria, muscle mass, but more importantly, blood sugar stability as well. It also helps regulate inflammation and gut health, which we saw was really key for our health and for energy production. So what is nutrient dense foods? At the end of the day, without getting too, technical or challenging, an easy way to do it is just look at the ingredient list. So if it's a one ingredient food, like an avocado, what is the ingredient in an avocado? It's avocado. Um, if you're looking at, let's say, a label and it has like up to 5 ingredients, you're doing okay. But if it has like a really long list of ingredients, you're probably heading into the more processed type of foods that have perhaps a lot of added chemicals. Also, if it has refined carbs and refined sugars, those are the types of things that, may promote more inflammation, isn't as good for gut health, and doesn't help with sugar stabilities. So all this to say, is just try to tip the scale towards that nutrient dense food. So just try to add in a little bit more on that side. The other thing is around macronutrient distribution. So the more we can balance the distribution at each meal, the better our metabolic health and steady energy. So you might remember at the top end of the presentation, we spoke about these proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. These are the macronutrients in food. And what happens is that they each give us energy for our bodies, but in different ways. So carbohydrates are the body's primary energy source. It's broken down into glucose, but they're kind of like fast acting. Fats are secondary energy sources, and they're more a slow and steady release of energy. And proteins, they're essential for building and repairing tissues, but they can also be used for energy, especially when carbohydrate stores are low. So the reason for, and then when we choose the type of macronutrients, so here's like 3 little tips, right? So the first one is if you're thinking about carbs, just again, opt for more complex carbs, which are things like whole grains, legumes, root vegetables. They have a more sustained release of energy than simple carbs, like the refined sugar type carbs, which are quick bursts, but then that gives you your sugar spikes and crashes. So it's a much more volatile sugar blood and insulin maintenance, right? So it's like much more volatile. We want to try to make it a little less volatile if we can from an energy perspective. The second thing is we want to try to incorporate all 3 elements in each plate. Like when I look at my plate or I make my meal, I'm always just kind of quickly scanning and saying, okay, well, do I have all 3 on my plate? Or is it really weighed like 90%, towards one area only? Because the more balanced it can be, again, that'll regulate our blood sugars and just make them a little less volatile. The third thing is that first meal of the day. So make sure you include, because sometimes for breakfast, some people have a tendency to be very high carb for breakfast. But if you ensure to incorporate those 3 elements in each meal, and if you're sure to incorporate protein and healthy fats in your first meal of the day, then that's going to not only, it's going to regulate your blood sugars, provide sustained energy, but the proteins will actually even help you feel more satiated during the day. So that's really when it comes to macronutrients, that whole trying to have a balanced approach. The third healthy eating principle is the eat the rainbow with plant diversity. So when it comes to hitting our micronutrient targets and establishing a really good gut health, diversity diversity, diversity is the key. So listen, as something to shoot for, it's great to have, sometimes a goal, but not necessarily, at least it's something to strive for. The goal will be to have, let's say, 30 plants per week. That would be an amazing principle to strive towards. But you're probably thinking, oh my gosh, how am I going to do that with ease? That's really not easy. So here, I'm just going to give you a before and after. So perhaps for a breakfast or a snack, you may be, let's say if someone were to say, you know what, I'm kind of hungry, or I'm going to have this for my breakfast. I'm going to have a bowl of Greek yogurt and have some fruit on top. And that's amazing. Well, if you take that same bowl and you add the following things, and I'll tell you my trick. In my pantry, I have a drawer, and I literally have my granola, flax seeds, pumpkin seeds, chia seeds, coconut flakes, almonds, all right there, and it takes literally like 10 seconds for me to just take from each and sprinkle a little on top of my bowl. All of a sudden, I've converted, my breakfast to something that is offering me way more plants, diversity. And if I add a little protein powder in there, I've got my protein, target as well, which helps me for my satiation and also maintaining my blood sugar. So that's just one example of in no time at all. And it's just sometimes it's not about, I'm still having breakfast, right? I'm still preparing a bowl of yogurt, and I'm literally just taking 10 seconds to add a few more things on top. And I've elevated, this from a health eating principle perspective. Finally, hydration. Hydration, it's something that is obviously super important for cellular respiration and our energy. And at the end of the day, I'll just tell you, I find drinking 2 liters a day or whatever I need to as a goal, very difficult. It's not easy for me. And so I try to embrace and celebrate every little sip I take. So every time I just, take a step towards it, for me, that's a step in the right direction. So there's only a few things to keep in mind to optimize the absorption of our hydration. So if you can weight it a little bit more in the first half of the day versus end of the day, it's just better for our bodies. Our bodies are better hydrated. They will function better. And plus, if you have less liquids at night, you might even sleep better, right? Depending if you're getting up to go to the bathroom or things like that. The second one is sipping. So rather than take 3 glasses of water and chugging it down every 5 hours, it's better to actually sip your water. It's like the principle of a sponge. If you have a dry sponge and you throw water at it, it's gonna splash right off. But if you give the sponge a little bit of water at a time, it'll absorb it. And so it's the same with our bodies. And finally, something also, because sometimes for water, it's nice to have a change or add a little zest to it, if you will. And I don't mean taking Gatorade in this case, but let's say you have a glass of water and you want to add something positive. You could add a little bit of salt, lemon zest, and just a splash of maple syrup. And there you have a homemade do-it-yourself electrolyte, which actually helps your body absorb it even better. So we're heading into the last area, which is movement. And so when it comes to sort of exercise or movement consistency, I just want to mention that action is what fuels motivation. And let me just speak to that a little bit more. So I think the secret to consistency, and I think this is one of the things that it can be the hardest, right, to implement. And first of all, I want to sort of make sure we define, exercise. So for sure, exercise has been proven to be an effective measure to help with fatigue. But at the end of the day, I think exercise doesn't mean having to go to the gym. Just being active and starting where you are and doing things that you enjoy. At the end of the day, it's moving our bodies that is important. But for me, consistency wise, the biggest thing is not overthinking. Action is what is going to fuel your motivation. Don't wait to be motivated to just get moving. I just, even like last week, I was tired. It was the end of the day, and if I had listened to myself and my body and what I felt like, and I would have told myself I don't have the energy and I'm just not going to go outside. But in the end, I just didn't listen to that narrative, right? That self-talk. And I just got up and went out, and it wasn't long. I maybe went outside and I did a couple of like, just walked for about 5-10 minutes. And it completely changed my energy. It completely changed the way I felt. So not overthinking and just doing, I think is, for me anyway, personally, has been a secret to consistency in terms of being active and my own personal practice and so forth. And I see a comment here, get a dog. And I do have a dog. And let me tell you, that does force me to get outside, rain or shine. So that is a good motivator as well. Um, so to conclude then, I just want to say that our energy really starts also with, self-love and self-compassion and self-care. Um, and one of the things I wanted to offer the group as well is, if anything today, and if you're more curious about, what this information could mean for you personally on a one-on-one, I am inviting this group as a longtime partner and supporter of the Canadian Breast Cancer Network. I would love to continue to support this community. And you are welcome to the QR code here. It's actually a complimentary 30-minute consultation call where we can continue the conversation one-on-one. And if you have any questions about, your personal approach and personal plan when it comes to your wellness or fatigue, then I'd be happy to continue that conversation with you. So that's my offer for this group, if you'd like. And I think right now we're going to open it up to questions.
Okay, well, thank you so much for that excellent presentation. That was wonderful, Tanya. So now we're going to open it up to participants send in their questions. Some have already done so. But I'm going to start you off with a couple of questions. So when we circle back to fatigue and tiredness, can you just very briefly explain the two differences? Because fatigue could be induced by a chemical, therapy,
Yeah.
therapy, or other drugs, and
Yes.
tiredness is tiredness. So touch
Yes.
a little bit on that, not from a medical perspective, from your holistic.
Yes. Sure. But I think like there is, when it comes to like medical experts in sleep and other areas, they do sort of define them in a certain way. So tiredness would be a short term sort of lull in your energy, but that is easily sort of reclaimed and easily managed with like a short period of rest, and that you can kind of easily get over. So it's kind of like your battery's drained a little bit, you plug it and then you recharge your battery and you're good to go. Fatigue is a bit more of like your charger's not working. So fatigue is something where it's a bit more present, and it's a bit more chronic, right? And you're having a harder time getting over it. And then you have sleepy, which is also in like another category, right? Where you're about to sleep imminently. That's being sleepy, which is different than fatigue also. Those are two different things.
Okay, just wanted to make sure that we
Yeah.
see them all. And now we didn't touch on anything, or you didn't touch on anything about weight and weight management, but that's not the question here. I just want, because we all know that with certain drugs, especially on hormone therapy drugs, some weight gain can happen to some
Mm-hmm.
or other drugs per se. Does weight a little bit overweight or some weight gain make a difference in how it affects your sleep?
So I think it's not the weight that affects your sleep. Like the thing is that I would say there's probably your metabolic health, right? So you have your metabolic health, which is how you process and your sugar blood levels over time, your insulin, and then your hormones. So what's happening underneath will impact your weight and will impact your sleep. Do you see what I'm saying? But I mean, unless it depends, it could be a situation, I don't know, depending on the weight, like it depends on the weight. If you're sleeping on if perhaps that causes you to sleep maybe more on your side or your back or things like that, maybe from a physical point of view, that might influence your sleep. But I haven't read anything where the weight in and of itself will impact your sleep.
Okay. And still in the same topic, is resting the same? Like if people have good resting periods, okay? They go home, they're feeling tired, they're gonna say, I'm gonna rest. I'm gonna try and fall asleep, but if I can't, I'll just rest for a couple of hours. Does that equate to sleep, or is that as beneficial?
So, so I would say that, okay, so I would say this. So I think, like you almost have to look at, like, so obviously sleep and rest are complementary, right? And, but at the end of the day, I would sort of look at that person's like sleep in and of itself, just to see, because if your sleep is not adequate, either from a quantity or quality, so that the next days, and also like it's normal, just by the way, it's normal by the way to have a bad night or two of sleep, right? So when we're talking about like an ongoing sleep issue, um, that's when the pattern is happening, for a bit longer period than we would like. But so I would first look at the person's sleep in general, because I guess back to your question, the answer would say it would depend, right? So if sleep is good and you just want extra rest, the rest also is like helping your parasympathetic, it's doing all kinds of other great things. Are you using the rest because your sleep is inadequate? Then it's a different answer and approach. Do you see where I'm going?
Yeah, yeah, that makes,
So, yeah.
yeah.
So
So,
they're both, I mean, rest is not in and of itself, rest is good.
right, right,
It's not a bad thing, especially if it's something that restores and replenishes and you leave after feeling replenished. Rest is great.
right,
But I
right.
think I would, make sure to look at the underlying or why you're resting and just make sure we're addressing both for, independently and how they're connected.
Okay, seeing that you know so much about the sleeping area, I just touch on something. Like we all have busy lives and we work and we do so much during the week. And like teenagers, they party, they do homework, etc. And then they do what we call binge sleeping on the weekend. Okay?
Mm,
I mean, it's been said that that's not the best way to get your sleep where it will promote, a healthy lifestyle.
correct.
People say, I'm going to do, but then on the weekend, I'm just going to binge sleep.
Correct.
Little insight on that.
Yeah. So, you can use that card like occasionally, once in a while, if it's an occasional thing. Yes, like you generally sleep, but so that's where uh, so again, if you're depleting your sleep, if you're having sleep restriction during the week deliberately, right? Because you're doing, I'm going to shorten my sleep, but it's not my optimal sleep for me, where I should be, and then trying to catch up on the weekend, you're not going to catch up everything you've missed. So you're in your net state is depleted overall. that, if let's say you had one bad night of sleep because of a trip, or, sometimes you're traveling, or something happens, you have to get up early for a flight, or you're for whatever, right? The child is waking you up. So like you can make up actually for those things, but it has to be the makeup sleep time has to be prompt, quick, and fully. Like, you got to do it, but it's not like this ongoing thing that's not going to result in optimal sleep patterns over time.
Right. And one last thing around that is sleeping aids, like sleeping pills,
Mm.
melatonin. You didn't touch on that, but we understand that a lot of people take it if they can't fall asleep. Where are you with that?
So listen, I mean, at the end of the day, um, I would say like that's ultimately a decision between the person and their healthcare team. But I would say that even the sleep experts, as an ultimate goal, would be to try to reduce and remove those sleep aids as an ultimate goal.
Okay.
So
And
I
we do,
think they can be, sometimes you need them like short term, right, to get you over a hump. But if you're relying on them consistently, because at the end of the day, I think that the idea is to try to retrain, because it's a training. Sleep is a natural process. We all sleep. So it's about like you can learn to sleep better. It's like something you can actually work on and strive towards. And that's that is a unanimous, I guess, from all the sleep experts, what they truly support and believe in is getting people there.
okay, thank you. I do have some questions that were sent in.
Yeah.
I'll start with question number one. Cortisol regulator has become popular. How do we know what are our levels of cortisol and if we need a regulator med or supplement?
Okay. So to be honest, I have to tell you, this is something I am not knowledgeable enough to speak to. I guess maybe because with 25 years of breath work and yoga practice, I don't need a supplement.
Right. Right.
So that's my answer. I
Okay.
would say, listen, supplements, I think that's just like, this is just my personal philosophy. I think supplements can play a role if they're really important and critical, and if you can't achieve it otherwise, right? Like on your own kind of thing. But
Yeah. You're right. I mean, these are things that they should be discussing with their doctors. Same with some questions came about regarding taking certain endocrine therapy medication
yes.
and how that affects sleep or other things.
Hmm.
I think everybody's different and
Yes.
how it affects a person is different. It depends on what else you're taking,
Yes.
are where you're at in your life and what
Yes.
else is going on in your life. So they're very good questions that are submitted, but
They're
an answer
yes,
are
absolutely.
personal, but it's something that
Yes.
needs to be discussed because it's related to the medication. So that would
Yes.
require a medical, conversation because it's related directly to something that you are taking. So it's a medication,
Exactly.
not.
So like a cortisol, like, an anti-cortisol like a supplement, I guess like you're big on, I know you're big on research, Kathy. So, but the research is overwhelming on the benefits of nose and diaphragmatic breathing on stimulating the parasympathetic system. And so through breath work, which is free, accessible, we can all do it. You just have to learn how. You can manage your cortisol, you can manage your parasympathetic and cortisol through breath work.
Okay.
And the
Uh,
clinical data is astounding. Like it's super
and it's good reference.
robust.
Yeah, exactly. Rebecca, I mean, I'm gonna wait for the other two questions because if you have some on your end, would you like to ask or should I go ahead, Rebecca?
You can go ahead.
Okay, okay. So there's a question here about a Fitbit. Do you promote use of fitness trackers to help regulate bodily systems?
So listen, I actually do. So like I don't always like so the answer is yes. I think awareness, I guess sometimes becoming aware of what we're doing is super insightful. So like I'll just give a recent example, right? I was working with someone and she knew her sleep was, not great, and then started like tracking it, and it was through the tracking it just for like a week or two that she realized what were the drivers in terms of causing her, sleep issues and like which things. And um, so I guess it will, so I do believe in sometimes just taking as a part of that process, right? Is looking at trackers and things just to have more awareness of how it impacts us, because we're also very bio-individual, we're all quite unique and different. And so one thing might impact one person, a little bit differently than someone else. But at the end of the day, like, that'll depend too on like what you want to track. And, there's all kinds of different tools and things out there now. So,
And I
um,
guess if it helps a person to get going and move and motivate,
correct.
that is,
Yeah.
yeah,
For some people, it's about like better understanding what's going on. For other people, it's like an accountability measure.
yeah. And
Yeah,
it,
so
it,
it,
it can work and it cannot. Like I personally, I don't speak about myself anytime, but I have a watch, like the Apple Watch.
yes,
I cannot live without it. It's been 7 years and it keeps me counting steps. And it's a
yes,
thing, but who would have thought?
yes.
No, I never would have thought that. Now, my husband got one last week and he wore it one day and it's done. It's over.
Okay.
So it depends on
It
what's going
depends on the person.
to be
Yeah,
effective for the person, you know? I
exactly.
wouldn't go out and spend too much money. I would just start, with the
No,
simplest gadget. And if it works for you, then you could treat yourself to something a little better. So it, it
exactly.
it depends on the person, the personality, etc. I have two good questions here, not that the others weren't, but I thought we might finish it off with this. So one is how do we avoid overwhelm and choose one small but impactful first step towards improving energy? So very quickly, because I want to get to the last question to finish us off.
So, to reduce overwhelm, one small impactful. So listen, I presented, so I would again, I would come back to whoever asked that question. We looked at three ingredients. Yes. Sleep, breath, and then the third was replenishing through nutrition and movement. So I would just say, just pick one, whichever one you feel you want to do more, want to do right. And so just pick that one and do that one small thing. So let's say for the sleep, it could just be have a regular, whatever, like that regular wake up time, or maybe a hot bath before bed. Like just try that one little thing. For breath, it's like just do that take five, right? Just breathe through the nose and do take five every day, once a day, and just start with that. And for nutrition and movement, well, you could pick whichever one that could be, is it the rainbow, or, just making sure you have three macros on your plate every meal, and the moving is just like yeah, it's like don't overthink. Next time you start overthinking,
Yeah.
just stop thinking and just go and do it, even if it's for like 5 minutes. So again, like I know I mentioned quite a few, but I like that's where like the power of like, you have to sort of do, I'm trying to, we want to empower people to, it's not like a one size fits all either, right? So we want to make sure people are doing what resonates with them. But I would just say pick one and just integrate it into your day-to-day and just try it and see how that goes as a
Right,
start.
right, right. And not to be hard on yourself.
Correct.
Do something. If
80/20.
it
It's
doesn't
like
work, move on and do something else.
tomorrow's another day. My
Nobody's
80/20 rule.
Yeah, nobody's going to judge you or make,
No.
as long as you want to do it and you try, well, that's good enough sometimes. So the
Yeah.
last questions, and we'll finish off with this. How long does it typically take to notice a shift in energy when someone starts making these lifestyle changes? Now, that's a good question in the sense that people think that things are going to change very quickly, and some people think it's not changing fast enough. So I think that's also personality trait, and
Hmm.
how patient you are, and what you
Hmm.
perceive as a good outcome. So I'll let you finish it off since you're the expert.
So, I would say, let's say you've picked one of the things today, right, to integrate in your day. Give yourself a ranking of like 1 to 10 of where your energy is at, right? Like at that point in your life, and you give yourself a ranking. And then measure it, let's say after 2 weeks, and then at the end of the month. And personally, what I've seen with people is that, I've definitely, you know, it's not going to be like that same week. Like it'll take weeks, but definitely by a month later, people have shifted, from being at an 8 to like in terms of like feeling over like not being great to like a 2 where like they're feeling like much better. So but it's not something it does take a little bit of time for sure.
Right, right. And not to be too hard on yourself. Sometimes it
No.
takes longer, and whatever time it,
Yes.
you know,
It
right?
can take longer and it's like an ebb and flow, but it's like but I would say like hopefully you're trending by a month, after a month, it's like are you trending in the right direction? As a general rule, again that 80/20, right? Like you gotta and you
Yeah.
could even journal. Like it could be like at the beginning, you give yourself a little rank and just write a few comments about how you're feeling, right? And then just come back to it as a self-reflection exercise, like 2 weeks later and then at the end of the month, and just kind of say, okay, what have I learned from this? And even if it's not going as fast as you think, like then it's like, okay, well then why? And then
Yeah.
maybe I can, just think about other different ways or resources I can lean on to.
And with that, I'll say everything it works. Like me now, it's all good. No matter if
Hmm.
you make it improve, if something in your life has improved, that's good enough. And the rest will
Hmm.
just follow through. I want to thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. And this concludes our time for today's session. Thank you, everyone, for your questions. They're great questions, and for joining us to learn about improving your energy. Thank you again, Tanya, for being here with us today. Thank you again to our sponsors, Pfizer, Bayer, Tercera, and AstraZeneca. Following the session, you will get a link to complete a survey to provide feedback on the session. Please consider leaving feedback as this helps us improve future sessions for attendees like yourself. Have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you, everyone, for a great session.
Thank you, everyone.